The Giraffe Who Saw to the End of the World by Patten. In a jungle that was almost a forest, and in a forest that was almost a wood, and in a wood that was almost a garden, there once lived an elephant and a flower and a pig and a giraffe and a kaput bird. There was also a hyena there and a plink-and-plonk and monkeys as well. And of course there was a forest of moonbeams, and a silver ant that dreamt of silence, and a river that told the strangest stories. Sometimes the giraffe came to the hill where the elephant and the flower lived. The giraffe had a very long neck, and when it stood on top of the hill and stretched its neck, it could see over the trees and mountains to the end of the world. One day the flower asked, "What is the end of the world like?" "Beautiful," said the giraffe. "What lives there?" asked the elephant. "Giraffes, of course," answered the giraffe. The elephant had always thought elephants lived at the end of the world, and the flower had always thought only flowers could live in such a faraway place. "Isn't there even one elephant there?" asked the elephant. The giraffe stretched its neck as hard as it could. It looked across the trees and the mountains for a long time and then said, "No, only giraffes." "Maybe the giraffes are hiding a few flowers," suggested the flower. "Most certainly not," said the giraffe. "He is not telling the truth," said a voice above them. It was the sparrow, who had been sitting all the time on the giraffe's head. "I can see the end of the world a little better than he can, and it's full of sparrows. Very large sparrows, even larger than eagles." The giraffe said it had forgotten to mention sparrows, as they were smaller than giraffes. "But there are definitely no elephants or flowers there," it insisted. "You're quite right," agreed the sparrow. The elephant and the flower decided to go for a walk instead of listening to the other two creatures, who were now boasting loudly. On their walk they asked all the creatures they met, "What do you think lives at the end of the world?" And the anteaters said anteaters, and the snakes said snakes, and the pigs said pigs, and the lizards said lizards, and every single creature thought the only things that lived at the end of the world were just like themselves, only a little larger. Later in the afternoon, when the elephant and the flower returned to the hill, they found all the creatures they had met on their walk gathered round the giraffe. The giraffe and the sparrow had agreed that only giraffes and sparrows lived at the end of the world. They were telling the other creatures that there were lakes and forests and rivers and trees and even weeds there, but no other animals. The animals were very indignant. "We want to see for ourselves," they shouted. "You can't," said the giraffe. "You're not tall enough." "You can't," said the sparrow. "You've got no wings." Then the pig had one of its rare ideas. "We'll all climb up the giraffe's neck and see for ourselves," it said. The giraffe didn't like the idea, especially as it was the pig's. "It's a stupid idea," it said. "Fancy a pig trying to make a suggestion of any kind. It's bound to fail." But the other animals did not agree. They wanted to see the end of the world for themselves, and they shouted and grunted so much that the giraffe had to agree to the pig's idea. So first the snake climbed up. "Just as I thought," it said. "The end of the world is full of snakes." "Nonsense," squeaked the pig, and he began to climb up the giraffe, slipping every now and then. He clung to the giraffe's ears and shouted down, "The snake's lying as usual. The end of the world's full of pigs. Very beautiful pigs. I can even see a king pig sitting on a throne." "Rubbish," shouted the anteater. "Let's have a look." And when the anteater had reached the top, it said, "Why, what glorious anteaters there are, and so many ants to eat as well." "I still think that they're all wrong," said the sparrow, who was fluttering above the anteater. "I'm the furthest up, and so have the clearest view. It's definitely sparrows." And so the creatures began to argue. "High up is far enough to see the end of the world," they shouted at the sparrow, and the pig was so angry it nearly fell down. "Take your feet out of my ears," it squeaked at the anteater, who was sitting unsteadily on top of it. "And take your hoof off my head," shouted the snake. As they argued, other creatures began to climb up the giraffe's neck. For miles and miles around, the jungle was full of talk and speculation about what lived at the end of the world. Soon there was a gigantic pile of creatures on top of the giraffe's head. There were snakes and anteaters and pigs and frogs and monkeys and the white rabbit as well. Only the larger jungle creatures stayed on the ground with the elephant and the flower. They thought it a rather undignified heap and knew quite well what lived at the end of the world. The giraffe's neck was beginning to ache and strain. All the time the creatures had been clambering over each other, a caterpillar had been slowly working its way up the giraffe's neck. It climbed onto the pig's head and stood upright. It was a very timid caterpillar and was a bit afraid of saying that the world was full of caterpillars. But it didn't have to anyway. The weight of all the creatures had become too much for the giraffe. It staggered on its feet, then tumbled down the hill. The creatures fell down on top of it in a huge heap. They all wriggled and groaned, and when they had untangled themselves, they surrounded the caterpillar. "It's your fault," said the pig. "It was your weight that made us fall. Now you'll have to settle the argument." The caterpillar was very afraid of the animals, and it didn't want to make them any angrier by saying the end of the world was full of caterpillars. So it said, "The end of the world's full of everything." Though the other creatures did not believe it, they were so relieved that it wasn't full of caterpillars that they agreed that maybe the caterpillar could see best after all. And so they went home happy, leaving the flower and the elephant alone on the hill. It was getting dark anyway.